We're super excited to be in conversation with one of the most talked about startups in the country. They're redefining the rapid e-commerce industry by delivering groceries to your homes in 10 minutes or less. Welcome, Kaivalya.
Hey.
So to start with, let's go to the beginning. I want to understand a little bit about growing up. What were your early exposures and what set you on the path to entrepreneurship?
Okay, good question. I think sort of found technology at a pretty young age. So I think maybe like 11 or 12 is when I would have like programmed for the first time. Adit, my co-founder, we've been friends since we were about 9 or 10 years old. Both of us somehow just, I don't know where the entrepreneurial this thing came from. Like my family isn't particularly, entrepreneurial, but yeah, somewhere or the other, I guess part of it would have been, growing up for us, a lot of tech companies like an Uber, food delivery, a lot of these industries started really coming up there. So some exposure to the fact that, you can actually use technology to do something in the offline world and add value in something, right? Like a food delivery or ride sharing. And so that's probably where part of this came from. And so yeah, growing up, both of us sort of tinkered on a whole bunch of small projects. And that probably laid some of the foundation of where we're at today. So yeah, that's what growing up is like.
Also, I was doing research for this interview, of course, and I also read about you guys had a lot of earlier projects that you guys worked on as well, right?
Yeah.
Both individually and together.
Yeah.
Could you shed some light on what are the biggest takeaways you had from those projects?
Sure. So yeah, a lot of them were very just spend a weekend and build something interesting type things. I think one example of one that we've done together was like a carpooling app for schools, right? Where people living in the same neighborhood going to the same school, trying to let parents basically just offload that school pickup and drop commute and find other kids from the same school that they could sort of club together. So that's one example, like stuff like that would just be some small problem that would be found interesting enough to work on. So yeah, things like that.
And how did you initially get started about Zepto? Like I know the journey from Kiranakart to Zepto now. How did the journey start for you guys?
Sure. So grocery delivery just became an interesting problem statement because I'm sure you remember the first wave of COVID, like sort of March, April 2020, how bad the situation was in India, where your local stores and people had gone back to villages on big basket, you had to wait for like a couple of days for a slot and stuff like that. And so we saw that, both of us were in Bombay. We faced that ourselves, our family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents, couldn't really get groceries. And so we'd seen that sort of grocery in other parts of the world, whether it's, the Middle East or it's the US or other places. Sure, during COVID there were problems, but they weren't like crippling, right? And then so okay, why is this delta so significant? Is there anything you can do about it? And so that's sort of where it started from. We tried many different models to solve this problem. Right? One, Kiranakart being one. And after sort of a year or so of iteration, arrived at that. Right? But it started out from there, saying like, why is grocery delivery so broken in India? Can we do something about it? Market seemed pretty large. It's the largest retail category in India, is grocery. And so, that's sort of where the curiosity started from. And then, over the course of about a year, tried many different things. And then mid last year is when sort of where this, after that innovation, we arrived at sort of quick commerce and Zepto was sort of born from that.
All right, so you took your MVP to like a smaller chunk of the market, like?
For Zepto or before that?
Before that,
Yeah, so initially it was just like our neighborhood. We were in auto rickshaws doing deliveries ourselves and stuff like that. And Kiranakart had scaled up to a couple $100 a day, right? And so it was, you could sort of say just in like an MVP type phase.
And I also read that you've been to YC, right?
Yeah.
Winter 21.
Yeah.
So how was the experience with the YC community?
So it was awesome. It was remote, right? Given the COVID thing. But it was great. I think, YC is a 3-month long program, and that it puts a lot of an interesting type of sort of pressure to get things done quickly, because you have a batch of companies that are all sort of facing that same pressure, saying that, okay, we have a deadline of demo day at the end of the batch, and we will need to show a significant amount of progress before then. And so that was good, right? That really, every week on week you would have like a meeting with your group partners, your mentors, and okay, last week we said this is the problem we had, so what we're going to do about it. And so a week later, you have to sort of show that progress, that okay, we've actually done something about it. So that compressed a lot of iteration. That was one. Second is the quality of the mentors that we have. Like we had people, like one of our mentors was a guy called Tim Brady, who was the first employee at Yahoo. Right? He was the chief product officer there, and had seen sort of the ups and downs in the late 90s, early 2000s at Yahoo. So people like that. So YC has the regular startup batch that they do. They also have YC Continuity, which is their growth fund. And so YC Continuity is one of our sort of major investors. They were major investors in our last two rounds. And so very, people from YC are on our board and stuff like that. So still very in touch with the entire YC community.
How did you arrive at the name Zepto?
Yeah, good question. Basically, so Zepto is a unit of time, right? So Zepto seconds is so the shortest unit of time. Where it came from, I don't really remember. It wasn't one of us. It was someone that had suggested it to us. I can't remember who. I think it was someone from like the Nexus team. So Nexus is one of our early investors. I think someone from that team. Back then, we would. So we raised some money for this idea without like arriving at a name, which said we want to do 10-minute delivery. And then along that journey, while we were starting to build up our team and all that, this sort of name, we knew we had to think of the name. And so, but it wasn't like a blocker. So we sort of did the two things in parallel. We tried to start building the team and work on the business while coming up with the name. So a month or two in, someone suggested Zepto, and honestly, I wasn't sold on it initially. I had to let it marinate for a while, but yeah, out of all the other options, it was the best one.
Also, now just going back to the early bit of your journey, who were some of your biggest supporters and mentors when you just started out?
Sure.
In this
so first mentors would have just been our parents, because they were okay with us sort of dropping out and stuff like that. But then beyond that, specifically within the startup community, the folks from YC, Sudhir from Nexus, who's one of our early investors for Zepto, people like that. Yeah. Who else? Yeah, I think a lot of people early on would have been a lot of the folks in the YC network who were really supportive, very easy to reach out to.
Since you mentioned dropping out, just again, what was there any particular moment, or were you guys considering dropping out for like?
Sure. So the decision was basically pretty simple. The idea was always go to university, work somewhere, make some money to pay back, parents for university, and then eventually at whatever 26, 27, start a business and raise money, whatever, do all that. This sort of allowed us to get to that part of the journey and bypass the university and the working for a couple of years part. And so it was like, okay, end goal is the same. You're able to do what you're going to do anyway, right? So as soon as we realized that Zepto had the potential of being that we anyway wanted to do, then it was like a no-brainer. Obviously, sort of convincing our parents of that was like a little bit more challenging, but yeah, I think they got it pretty quickly.
So you must have needed a little bit of resources, capital, and figuring out the logistics when you first started off. How did you guys manage to do that bit?
Sure. So at Kiranakart, the way we started building this out was sort of like a Shopify for Kirana. So like when we give them a storefront, and things that didn't require much investment. Right? That was just like an app that we put together. Initially, we would do the deliveries ourselves, like I said. So stuff like that didn't require much investment, just to prove the hypothesis that this is something that could work. As we were doing that, we also started raising like a little bit of seed capital, got into YC and all that, which is where we were able to sort of fund some of the logistics as we wanted to scale. And then similarly for Zepto, we raised a Series A from Nexus in around March, April last year, something like that timeframe, which sort of allowed us to start building out the team for Zepto, and the initial couple of dark stores. We were able to do that using that capital that we raised.
One of the topics that I've personally seen on a lot of the online discussion forums, which is regarding the safety of your delivery partners. How do you guys go the extra mile to ensure that?
Sure. So this is like you said, a very common topic that is thrown around a lot in the media. Very simply put, and the perception that exists is that for this model to work, delivery partners have to drive really fast, right? Which is sort of not the case at all. The reality of this model is, or the principle that this model is built on is short distances. Right? So the dark stores that we sort of set up and operate are typically, on average, 1.7 kilometers away from the average customer. Right? And so, a lot of our deliveries really happen on like bicycles and e-bikes and stuff like that, because the distances are so short. And so that is what the principle is, right? So if you want to do a delivery in 10 minutes, we get the dispatch happens very quickly. So from the time that you order, we typically will dispatch it from the warehouse in about 60 seconds, right? And so we have about 9 minutes to get the delivery done. And traveling about 1.5 kilometers in 8-9 minutes, you don't actually have to travel that fast, right? And so the core principle of this model is reducing the distance with the customer, not really driving quickly, right? So that's sort of where it comes from. In terms of beyond just the speed part of it, the model that we operate also allows us to offer a pretty interesting value proposition to delivery partners compared to other models, right? So in food delivery, for example, you could start your day in Combinator, deliver an order in Kiranakart, and pick up from a restaurant in Kiranakart, go to YCombinator, and so on and so on. At the end of the day, you ended up in, let's say, one field, whereas you live in Combinator, where you started, right? And so to make that trip back, for example. And at the same time, you're on the road all day, whether it's raining or not, where like most restaurants may not let you use a bathroom, for example. So it's not a basic thing, right? Whereas with the dark store setup, we can actually provide a lot of these, and we do provide a lot of these basic sort of amenities, like a bathroom, a place, like food, water, things like that, a place to sit, a place to charge your phone, basic things, right? That sort of, and that's part of the reason why, if you look at sort of rider retention, this model is structurally is a lot better compared to traditional models like food delivery.
I want to discuss a little bit more about your plans for the future.
Sure.
What are you guys looking at now? Expanding within the country, going international?
Sure. So currently we're live and we cover pretty much the top 10 Indian metros. I think there's a lot of scope still within India, right? A lot of cities to look at. So there'll be a geographical expansion that will happen within the country over the next year and a half. Eventually, international may be something that's interesting as well. But there's another type of growth that's also very interesting, which is category expansion, right? So today it's grocery, a category that we piloted some time back and are now scaling is Zepto Cafe, which is chai, coffee, sandwiches, samosas, like a basic Starbucks type assortment. OTC pharmacy is an interesting one that at some point in the future we'd like to get into piloting things like beauty, makeup, and stuff as well. And other use cases. So, for example, in monsoon season, we started selling umbrellas, right? So, I need to step out of the house, it's raining, and I can get an umbrella in 10 minutes. So, other use cases like that are not necessarily traditional grocery, just to expand sort of horizontally. That's an additional type of expansion that will continue to happen in parallel to the just geographical expansion of launching in more neighborhoods.
What's your favorite sector ad?
The Shankar Mahadevan.
What does money mean to you?
Freedom.
What do you love most about your job?
Solving very difficult problems.
What does failure mean to you?
An opportunity to sort of try again.
What do you like better, getting up early or working late?
Working late.
What other startup do you wish you were founder of?
Oh, there's so many. In India or globally?
Globally.
So many. You have all the classic ones. There were Googles and Amazons. In India, I think Zero has been a great job. I'm really big fan of the Kama brothers. So there's a lot of fantastic startups around the world.
I noticed you wear Jordans, so high top symbols.
I'm a high top guy. I'm a high top guy.
So this brings us to the end of today's discussion. I'd like to thank you so much for your time.
Yes, sir.
I wish you all the best.
Appreciate it.